All right, let's get into it. Today, we're talking about belief and what the nature of a belief is and some of the impacts it can have on the world and on us, and some of the skepticism which arises as a result of poorly formulated beliefs and how to evaluate beliefs, perhaps. So, perhaps it's best to first define what a belief actually is. A belief can roughly be defined by a proposition or claim about the world. Very simple explanation, isn't it? Fundamentally, that's what a belief is. Whenever we hold a belief, what we're saying is that we claim that some concept of the world or the way in which the world is and the way that we see it is true. Now, there is a further definition that sometimes gets used, or a further method of evaluating beliefs, and that is the justified true belief model. So, in order for us to say that we actually hold a piece of knowledge, that our belief is the way that it says it is, it's veridical, okay? It is as it purports to be. We've made a claim, the world is such and such a certain way, and it is actually that way. That's what we're saying, that's what we hope we're saying. So, if that is to be the case, then we need the justified true belief method. We have to believe that the proposition we're making is true, which hopefully we do. If we don't believe something to be true, but we proposition it anyway, then we're lying, aren't we? That's not good. So, for a belief to be true, for a belief to be as you say that it is, you have to believe it. It has to actually be true. Self-explanatory, right? It has to be the way that you say it is. And you need to be justified in making that claim. Now, it's the justification part that really trips people up, and or people just disregard it. And a lot of people dismiss it intentionally, and we'll get into some of those people. Okay, most of them are going to be politicians. Um, but your everyday person who's not aiming to ruin other people's lives and attain power for themselves, just everyday people, not sucking the life out of the economy, just normal everyday people, not a politician who's corrupt and evil and corrosive, just an everyday person. They hold a belief. They claim that the world is as they say that it is. They believe that it's true. Perhaps it really even is true, the way that they defined it or described it. But if they can't justify their belief, it can't be charitably awarded to them that they have that piece of knowledge, okay, that their belief is justifiable. What do I mean by justification? Well, if I make some claim, say I want to make a moral claim, like murder is wrong, and I universalize it. So I say it's across the board, all facets of the world, murder, as we've defined murder to be, the intentional act of killing someone, is wrong. I've made that claim. That's a belief that I hold. Okay, that's my proposition. How am I justified in making that claim? I need some further evidence in order to reinforce my argument. My argument is murder is wrong. It's not good enough just to say that murder is wrong. Maybe everyone even agrees with me. Maybe most people would agree with me. Murder is actually wrong. We all believe it to be true. It is true. But do we have evidence to support the fact that this is true? So, in order for me to make that claim and actually have that piece of knowledge and it be accepted in the database of human knowledge, then I need some extra information about my claim. So, I might say something like murder creates despair for the victim and creates entropy for everyone involved. The perpetrator, his life gets disrupted, he goes to jail, or she. Um, the victim, he or she, life is over and all their family is in chaos, and that's not good. That's very important, that part. You have to define it as bad. So everyone's lives associated with the act of murder will um, divulge into chaos, and having that amount of chaos and despair in one's life is not good. It's contrary to flourishing. So that might be one way I might reinforce my claim. And so let's just say that we granted that. I'm giving you very sort of basic and broad concepts here. I'd probably need a few more details, but let's just say that that's the one that I've given and that's the one I need. You've granted that, perhaps. That's an acceptable reason. Therefore, I'm justified in making the claim. Well, that was a moral belief, but what about a belief about how the world actually is, rather than about how we should behave in the world and how we should attend to our lives? Perhaps something about how the world actually is. It's a good one. What's a good belief about the world? Perhaps a political one. Maybe I might say global warming is the largest threat to humanity. It is the number one priority on the scale of potential for human suffering. We must act now. Okay, that's my belief. Global warming is um, devastating and terrible, and we must work to rectify it. Well, how could I justify it? I'll have to say something like historic data shows that we were less healthy by whatever metrics we use to evaluate health than we are now in relation to climate. We have, I'd have to say something like, we have more deaths related now due to climate than we did previously in history. That'd be a good way to justify it. Or that um, severe weather events are far more frequent today than they have been historically. Those are some of the evidence pieces that I would need to produce, and I would also need to produce those documents, that data that actually reflects those premises. As it happens, that's not correct, those claims that I made to justify it. We have far less adverse weather events today than we did 100 years ago, and we're far more healthy by every available metric that we use to evaluate health. So, in that instance, I wouldn't be justified in making the claim. Now, let's not get too hung up on the beliefs per se, because they only serve to explain. They're only a placeholder to describe process of knowledge that I'm trying to describe here. When discussing things about knowledge, belief, it's not enough just to proposition a claim and then assert it to be true by the very structure of the claim that you've made, or that I make, or that anyone makes. It's not enough. Because what you're fundamentally saying is, if I say something like, trying to think of another political one, perhaps something about the economy. Um, if I say something like, government spending does not cause inflation. I did a right wing one. Let's just we'll do a left wing one. This one, government spending does cause inflation. Let's just say that government spending causes inflation. Why? Because I said so. Um, they always omit the because I said so. But what I'm saying is, they say like inflation is caused by other features of the world and not by government spending, or they just omit it. But the point is, if you just make a claim like that, a proposition, with no justifiable evidence to reinforce that claim, what you're fundamentally saying is the structure of the argument is government spending causes inflation because government spending causes inflation. That's fundamentally what you're saying when you neglect to elaborate on the beliefs that you proposition to the world. Now, I'm giving you political examples because politics is where this happens most frequently. Very often, and I'm lumping them all in together, the right and the left. This is not a right versus left problem. This is a political problem. They all do it, and they're all very good at it. It just rolls off the tongue for them. They make a claim about the world, about the nature of their policy that is fundamentally incorrect, or they omit certain details in relation to the policy or the way they see the world. It gives the impression that the world is a certain way, the way that they say it is, and then they neglect to elaborate or provide evidence. It's just assumed that the correct people have done the due diligence and you can trust us. The only problem with that is that a lot of the time they're wrong, or the actual belief is not to the degree they say it is, or it is more than they say it is. They either omit certain details or they keep out certain details. And they all do it. The media, the politicians, they all do it. And a lot of the people associated with those circles. Okay, those are your Abby Chatfields and Drew Pavlos. Okay, those type of people. Okay, it's just rhetoric. Propositions, conclusions, no justifiable evidence. And the reason for that is because then they get to make a lot of propositions very quickly, and the public is left to try and evaluate all of them, which is just impossible. The amount of policy that gets written and made is disproportionate to the amount of time required to really discuss the details of the policy and how it's going to impact the world and whether it's going to be negative or positive, whatever method you use to evaluate. And so, for those who are already skeptical, well done. For those who are not, have a think about it. It's very important when people make claims about the world, and I've cut across the entire board here. It's not a right versus left issue, it's a political issue. They all do it, the whole lot of them. They proposition, and it only serves to reinstigate them in their position, which is financially rewarding. And once they're in, there's no guarantee that they're going to follow along any of their policies or that the policies will work out in the way that they intend to. Very often they don't. So have a think about it. Justified true belief. Are the claims these people are making true? And if they are, why are they true? And that's very important. You have to be able to explain the why. This is what philosophers try to do. Take great pains to do so. And when you start attempting to do it, have a go. It's quite difficult. And if you start discovering that it is difficult for you, that also means it's difficult for them. And so you see where I'm going here. If it's difficult for them and it's difficult for you, then it's very likely that they haven't done the due diligence necessary to be making the sorts of claims that they make. And remember that these policies have very real impacts on your life. Everything from energy to immigration policy to housing policy to fiscal spending. All of these concepts and actions that governments take directly impact you because it gets funded by the taxpayer. Everything. If they borrow from a bank, which is not by the taxpayer, but they still need to repay the debt. And that comes out of the taxpayer's pocket. Every government action that gets made, you all know it intuitively, but it needs to be said more often because it doesn't need to be that way. And some of the actions that the government decides to allocate your resources to are disproportionate to the effects that they actually produce. They don't produce, the return on investment is not adequate for the amount that they spend in these domains. The energy policy is a really good example. So they've attempted to radically reduce our fossil fuel consumption and replace them hastily with renewables. And they've given large private corporations very large amount of subsidies, and a subsidy is either a tax exemption or outright financial aid, and that comes out of the taxpayer straight away. Both of them, regardless. If the corporation pays less tax, then you pay more. If the corporation gets financial aid, then that's taxpayer money. It might sound obvious, but how often do we discuss the world in this way? Very rarely comes up with people I talk to. It's intuitive, but we all know it. And governments can make mistakes. And in fact, they frequently do. So that's the primary reason for the discussion about belief and the necessity to take on a skeptical approach. Very often, when we evaluate truth of the propositions that we hear from the external world, we evaluate them based on whether we agree with them, which is not good. I know why we do it because it's very comforting, and I am not immune to it. And in fact, I've very often um, taken on badly formulated beliefs in the past because of this very reason, which is why I'm talking about it. We evaluate a belief comes into us, a friend makes a proposition, or we hear something in the media, or a politician makes a claim in his infinite wisdom, and we think, I agree with that, therefore it's true. That's what fundamentally is going on whenever we agree with it, but we take on a belief without due diligence, without the skepticism. What we're saying is, implicitly, I agree with that belief, therefore it's true. That's not a good way to evaluate belief. That's not a good way to evaluate propositions about the world. And again, I'm only bringing it up because that's how I used to evaluate them. I used to hear something and then I agree with it and I go, it has to be true because I am the best evaluator of truth in the world because I'm the one living in the world. It's me who's having the experiences, it's me who's hearing the beliefs, and it's me who's evaluating whether it's true or not. And I would never make a wrong decision. I couldn't possibly. I'm too good at evaluating the veracity of the beliefs. But that's a really flawed way of thinking. It's a really flawed way to understand the world. And it's a really dangerous way to understand the world. And I had many beliefs that were bad, bad beliefs. Not bad in the sense of good or evil. I don't like those terms, but just bad in the sense of like just wrong. They were poorly formulated beliefs, very little justification, and I just agree with them. Therefore, they're true. Not good. So it is quite cleansing once you start evaluating or being skeptical when you hear beliefs and propositions in the world, because you're no longer susceptible to strategy, which some people use. Some people give beliefs with the intent to manipulate. Now, I'm going to be very careful here because I don't want to develop into a conspiratorial argument, which I very quickly could. I could say if we grant that some people use beliefs and propositions that are not true in order to manipulate certain people, then we could also grant that groups do this. And if groups do this, we could also grant that bigger groups with larger resources could pull them together in order to manipulate vast amounts of people in the world. And vast groups, large groups, big corporations could collude together in order to manipulate large amounts of. It's a conspiratorial claim. It sounds plausible. I don't necessarily believe that there are people in dark rooms somewhere scheming like this, but very often propositions are made with the intent to deceive. And politicians do this all the time. Salespeople do this all the time. I hope you're not a salesperson. I'm about to pick on you. Politicians offer up beliefs that aren't true, or they omit information about propositions to dodge scrutiny. Very often, that's why they don't want to be scrutinized, because they just want to introduce their policy. They're sure they're right because, of course, they are. They're the politician and they're never wrong. And they just want to get on with it and import their policy. They don't want to. So that's fundamentally why they lie so much, because they don't want to be scrutinized on the basis of their poorly formulated propositions and policies. Even though they're poorly formulated, um, salesmen also do this. The goal of the salesman is to sell you a product. Now, in a perfect free market world, in a consumer-led economy, which is what the free market is, a free market is a consumer-led economy, people are less, again, I'll be careful here, businesses are less likely to um, produce products with the sole intention of profit rather than in service to the consumer because of competition. Okay, that's what a genuine free market is. Consumers are the leaders of the free market. If a producer produces a product the consumer doesn't want, or for a price that the consumer is unwilling to pay for, the consumer doesn't pay for it. And they go to someone else. And that's why capitalism is so great. True capitalism, free market capitalism, not whatever this is at the moment. That's why it's so great, because adequate competition very often drives innovation and drives prices down because consumers are the one leading the economy. Now, when it's not a consumer-led economy, like today, we're very scarce or scant for choice. I don't know if you've ever been, don't know what it's like over east, but in Western Australia, there's only a handful of shops and they're all the same. Doesn't matter which mall you go to, all the shops are the same. Okay, that's monopoly type behavior, and that's indicative of a less capitalism economy, okay? Capitalist economies have competition. There's no competition at the moment. So back to sales. Salesman goal is to sell you a product. Salesman doesn't eat unless he sells products. That's a better way to frame it. And so very often salespeople do whatever is necessary in order to sell products, including giving you false information about the products they're selling or misrepresenting their position in the nature of the sale. Right? So a good example is a dodgy car salesman. Don't know if you ever had one of those, but you go into a car yard and he says, I'll swear by it. I've just come in. It's just been serviced. It's all hunky dory. It drives like a dream. Congratulations on your new car. Can I ring it up? Go something like that. And if you're susceptible to sales techniques, you'll buy it. And, or if they're a good enough salesman, you'll buy it, whatever the case may be. And then you drive it out of the car lot, and then 10 miles later, it breaks down. The carburetor's broken. Okay, the salesman's given you dodgy advice. His goal was to sell the car, and he's achieved that goal, right? So that's a scenario where a salesman is giving you false information. He's made a claim about the world that the car runs well. The carburetor's all hunky-dory. It runs like a dream. Congratulations on your new car. Okay, that was his line of reasoning. And we thought, well, this is all on the up and up. We'll buy it. Sounds good. And it was incorrect. Okay, the proposition was wrong. And presumably, you have to be charitable and say he knew that the car had problems. Okay, he's in the business of cars. Presumably knows every car on his lot. Okay, he 100% knew that the car had problems. So he gave you false information. His proposition was with the intent to make a sale rather than to give you all the information. You might not have bought the car if you realized the carburetor was not. Is a carburetor a real part or is that fictitious? Let's just say that it is. I don't know anything about cars, so that'd probably work on me, to be honest. There you go. I'm the sucker that bought the car. Well done. So he's made a proposition. The proposition has with the intent to make a sale, and I bought the car. Well, it was me. Now the car's fucked. Now another problem is real estate. Now I did a course on real estate, and what I found out was that real estate salespeople are legally obliged to represent the buyer. The seller, rather. Sorry, the seller. They legally represent the seller. Okay, it's a contractual obligation between real estate salesperson and the seller of the house. Okay, the person who owns the house who's trying to sell it to another person. But very often, real estate salespeople will play both sides of the fence. They will discuss the nature of the sale of the house as if they are on the side of the person purchasing the house. Now, in some sense, that's true because they're on your side insofar as it allows them to sell the house. But fundamentally, what they're trying to do is get paid, and they don't get paid unless they sell the house. And so they do whatever they can to achieve that goal. And very frequently, they misrepresent their position, which I think is unethical, personally. But apparently they're allowed to do that because they are. There's no clause in the policy or in any of the regulations which says you must announce to each seller as you meet with him that I am legally obliged to the interests of the seller and not to you. Okay, there's no regulation that says that. And so if you're unaware that the real estate salesperson does not represent you, and in fact they're legally obliged to the seller to represent his interests and not yours, and that information can be used in ways that result in you making a decision you might not have always made. Now remember, because they represent the seller of the house and they also want to be paid, it is in their best interest to get as much money as possible. That means getting you to pay, if you're a purchaser of a house, getting you to pay as much as you can. Their goal is to sell the house. They're legally entitled to represent the interests of the seller, and their goal is to get them the best price and themselves the best price. But they're also not required to tell you that they legally represent the seller. Now, again, it might seem obvious. Maybe everybody knows this, and maybe it's just me. I didn't know it. I thought it was very interesting when I found out. And the reason it piqued my interest is because very often, very frequently, I see advertisements. Australians love property, don't they? We're a property hoo-ha of a nation. Property here and property there and here, there and everywhere. We love property. So I always see advertisements and they're always made by real estate salespeople. And when they generate these advertisements, they say things like, perhaps it's an Instagram thing, perhaps it's an outright sale. They say things like, buy now, market's hot, to use the salespeople lingo. Market's hot. I'm sure they say stuff like that if they're hip. Gone. Don't know if that one will work. It's a pretty cheap one, but you get the point. I saw an Instagram one once that said, "Here's a quick tip: don't wait to buy. The market is only going to go up. Quick tip: buy now. Do not wait." That was what they said. Now, when they make that proposition, you should buy this house now because I'm filling in all the gaps. By the way, all they said was quick tip: don't wait. Okay, that was their advertisement. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, do not wait to purchase a house. Buy one as soon as humanly possible because you cannot wait in the hope that the market is going to correct to a position that is favorable to you. You have to buy now. The market's only going to go up. But in your doing so, in your purchasing now, hastily, perhaps even before you're ready, you and various other people are continuously purchasing houses, which drives prices up. And so the claim that they're making is that you must purchase a house now, otherwise prices will go up. But in your purchasing a house now, the prices go up. And so the claim that they're making that it is orchestrated and built in a way that's to represent you because they're speaking to the seller. They're speaking to the purchaser. They're not speaking to the seller. They're not saying, quick tip, don't wait, sell now. No. They're saying, quick tip, buy now. They're speaking in a way as if they represent your interests. But hang on, they don't represent your interests. They're legally obliged to the seller. It doesn't make any sense. And so very often, these real estate people will make their propositions and their claims as if they're on the side of the purchaser. But that's not true. They legally represent the seller. They're lying. Okay, they're making a proposition in a way to evoke action for you to purchase a house, to engage in behavior you might not have otherwise done if you had all the information, or if you were to assume that the market would correct. Perhaps you're not ready to purchase yet. Perhaps you wouldn't have bought that particular house, but you thought that that was the only one available because that's the position the real estate salespeople said it was. And they said in a way that was acting in your behalf. Now that's not good, that's not ethical. And so they're making claims about the world that are untrue in ways that are trying to manipulate you. And I just think that's incredible. And nothing's being done about it. We make all these other regulations about building houses that you can't do this here and you can't build this sort of property on this size shed or whatever and this part of the property and you have to subdivide or whatever. Got all these regulations in place, got a big stack of them. I'm sure I could fill this entire room with stacks of regulation. But nothing that says that the real estate sales person who facilitates the transaction, the key person that's able to create the wealth in Australia, because the wealth is only defined by how much it produces. Money has to change hands, and then the government's also happy because they get tax, don't they? Just solved my own problem, haven't I? There it is, job's over, solved the problem. The government gets the tax from the transaction. Of course that's not regulated, because then the governments wouldn't get paid. If there were less people purchasing houses, there'd be less tax revenue. I'm sure they'd squeeze it out of us anyway. But you see the point? Real estate salespeople are not obliged to tell you. In fact, they very frequently do not. They run on the assumption that you already know, or it's of your own due diligence to discover that amongst your travels. Anyway, that's my rant. Belief and the way politicians and salespeople manipulate us. It's a good title. There you have it. Right, the belief stuff came out of a book. It's some early um, bachelor degree philosophy stuff. I'm not an expert in it. I've given you very broad and cursory definitions and understandings of the nature of belief. There's much more to be discussed about it. There's much more to be discovered about it. There's much more for me to learn about it. But that's one aspect of it, and it's the part I'm interested in. I'm interested in economics, I'm interested in politics and the way people use belief in those fields. So that was how I discussed it. Next week, I think we're going to talk about ethics. I'm doing ethics at the moment in one of my courses, and it's quite interesting. So might cover some of that. But there you have it. That's it. That's the end of the episode. The nature of belief. Stay tuned. More to come. Thanks for watching.